Hey, it's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla. So we wanted to make this video to show you how to use one of our most popular Greyscalegorilla plugins, Signal. We built this plugin to help C4D artists animate really quickly, and now it's being used in practically every professional Cinema 4D scene. But if you're just getting started with Signal, we know that it could be a little bit daunting, a little bit confusing to get started with it. So we partnered up with our buddy Jake Allen to show you some of the powerful and simple ways that he uses Signal in his everyday work, including blockbuster superhero movies that I'm sure you've seen. Jake's going to show you 5 ways to use Signal in your everyday animations to help you save time and get more control over your animations. And don't forget, if you're a Greyscalegorilla Plus member, you have access to all of our plugins, including Signal. So make sure you have it installed. We even included the scene files for this tutorial. Make sure you download them below, and then you can get started right away. But be careful, once you watch this video, you're gonna wanna use Signal in every animation you make. All right, with that, let's kick it over to Jake Allen to get the training started.
Hey there, everybody. My name is Jake Allen. I'm a motion designer and 3D animator based in Chicago. Whether you're familiar with Signal or you're brand new to Greyscalegorilla's tools, we're going to show you 5 things you didn't know you could do with Signal. Well, maybe you know them if you've already used the plugin before, but what we want to do with this video is help you hit the ground running with Signal and show you 5 examples where you can apply it to your work. So I use Signal both personally and professionally, and I kind of wish I had used it a little bit earlier, as it makes certain things in the program really easy, and it's very art directable. And sometimes when you want to make changes to your scene, you have to do a lot of manual adjustments, and it can be really time consuming. So what is Signal? Signal's a plugin that lets you do automatic or procedural animation without keyframes, and it has the ability to easily loop these animations as well. It might be hard to kind of wrap your head around that concept, at least I know it was for me. So I feel like this first example should be a good introduction into what Signal can do, especially with position, scale, and rotation of objects. So in this scene, I've arranged a bunch of the Greyscalegorilla doodads and a few of these primitive objects into a sort of fun arrangement. And something we get asked a lot to do in motion graphics is to add some subtle animation or looping movement to something, whether this is going to be the background to a music video or whether it's going to be on social media. All that kind of stuff is really important. And if you've worked with Cinema 4D before, you're probably familiar with the vibrate tag. And what that does is it just adds random position, scale, and rotation to an object. It's kind of like the wiggle expression in After Effects, if you're familiar with that. So Signal, a good analogy, could be to think of it as a vibrate tag, but sort of taken to the next level. Now let's take a look at what you can do with position, scale, and rotation with Signal right off the bat. We're going to take this position and we're going to drag it onto the tag. And now we're going to go into modifiers and add some noise. And this UI right here looks very similar to the vibrate tag. We're going to add something like 50, 50, 50. And we've got a loop point. That's something different that's really important about Signal and probably one of its most powerful features. Our timeline is set from 0 to 144, so I'm going to set it to 145. By adding 1 frame, we don't get a duplicate at 144 and 0. If I click play, you'll see that the moment that it crosses that threshold, it automatically loops. Now that's super cool, but one of the things that I wanted to show you is rather than adding signal tags and dragging and dropping parameters on top of them, we can use this new feature from Greyscalegorilla called the drop zone. And what that is it's a window that you can dock within your UI, just like this. And let me just rearrange this. And when you drag and drop attributes onto it, it automatically creates a signal tag for you. So for example, if I click on my main cube and I go back to its rotation values and I drag and drop this onto the drop zone, we automatically get a signal tag added that's already linked to the rotation. We can do the same with position, and then we can go back and we can do the same thing with scale. So now we've got PSR tags. We can individually add noise to them, and we can have them loop. Now that's super cool, but it can also get very time consuming if you want to do it for multiple objects. So let's say you want to add a PSR tag on all of these different things. Well, that's where Greyscalegorilla has created a series of scripts as well for Signal that can speed up some of that process. To access those scripts, we can go to Extension, User Scripts, our User Scripts folder, and then Signal Scripts. Now it's a little bit buried in here, but if I pull these out, we can take a look at what the options are for these different presets and these different modifiers. So they both have some common actions that you might want to do. For example, adding bounce or flicker. The one that we're really focusing on right here is PSR vibrate. And what that can do is it automatically adds a position, scale, and rotation signal tag and adds a noise. Some of these other commands we're going to run into that are really, really convenient. For example, offsetting adding random seeds, or selecting all of your signal tags. So for future use, I'm just going to right click and go to Customize Palettes, add a group separator up here, and I'm just going to drop these 4 scripts into my UI for the rest of these videos. Select all signal tags, and that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and add some random position, scale, and rotation values to our objects. Selecting the main cube, going all the way down to GSG Doodad's sphere number 14. And let's go up to the top here and select PSR Vibrate. Whoa, look at that. So we've got random position, scale, and rotation on all of our objects right now. Now the scale of my scene might be a little bit small for the default settings. So let's just go in and give it a few values that may make it a little bit more accessible and workable. So let's go into our scale, change this down to 111, change its strength to 50, set this to be both negative and positive. And under rotation, let's change this to like -180, 0, 0. Now, using this script right here, select all signal tags, we can go down and edit our loop point. So I'm going to set that to 145. And now when I click play, you'll see this random position, scale, and rotation on all of our objects. Whoa, would you look at that? Now they're moving a little bit fast. So I'm going to select all these, go down to speed, set that to like 0.2, and I'm going to set the bias to something like, I don't know, 12%. Now when I click play, okay, a lot more subtle, a lot more interesting, and they're all looping. We're pretty much done. But you say, Jake, the objects are all moving at the same speed, scale, and rotation. Well, the one thing we can do to fix that is adjust their random seeds. And what that means is that each of these tags have the same random seed values. So when we adjust this for each of these tags, we can get a different random value. Now that may be kind of tedious to do one by one. So what we can do is just click Select All Signal Tags, go to our random seed script, click that one, and now voila, we've got random animation going across all of these different objects in our scene, and we got something that loops. In just a couple minutes, we've created something that we can send to render, send to an art director to check out, and basically show somebody at the end of our project. Okay, so looking at the final version of this scene labeled End, I ended up taking a little bit of creative liberty with some of these things. For example, on the pink objects, I got rid of the scale. On the green and blue objects, I got rid of the rotation. And I ended up adjusting some of these variation time offsets and things like that. But the animation is very similar to what we ended up with in the previous example. And my random seed values have changed as well. So if I click play, you'll see something that's slightly different. But I encourage you to go into this scene and look at what I adjusted. And let's take a look at our render. Okay, so here's our render. And look at that. And you can see once it hits the end of the timeline, it automatically loops. We've got this fun, playful animation, and we did it only within a couple of minutes. So Signal can control position, scale, and rotation data. And in the next example, we're going to take it even further. Signal doesn't just have to work on objects, we can adjust our lights as well. Let's hop into that. All right, so welcome to example number 2. Now this scene mimics a lot of the stuff that I end up working on. This is like a product lighting shot with art directed reflections and light sweeps. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Signal to drive these lights right here. Now I'm going to do all of my animation on one signal tag, and then I'm going to copy and paste it to the rest of it. So let me just turn these off, and you can see that I have this side light activated right now. Now the actual object is made up just of a Greyscalegorilla doodad with some shiny parts made out of cubes. I don't really know what this does, but I want it to look really cool. And that's where Signal is going to come in. Let's start out by right-clicking. Oh, I want to make sure you almost got me. Let's start out by going into our object, taking its intensity and dragging and dropping it onto our drop zone. And let's change the min and max values to 0 and 1. So ignoring the noise at the moment, this base tab lets us animate between a min and a max value. If I drag this time slider like so, and I go down and set the end frame to 48, which is our current timeline, you'll see that it animates between those min and max values. That's pretty cool. But what if I want it to turn on and then turn off again? So what I can do is go into this timeline, and I can add a third dot, and I can go like this, and the light will fade in and then fade out. That's super cool. Now let's add a little bit of noise to this object so that the light will have a little bit of a flicker. I'm going to go here, I'm going to change the strength of this to 40%. I'm going to change the variation to, I think it's 0.15. And I'm going to change our loop point. Actually, I don't really need to care about the loop point because it's going to be dark at the beginning and the end. But I want to change the speed, let's see, to something like 10. And I'm going to change the bias to 9%. So it's really hard to see when I click play because of this kind of low quality preview, but there's a little bit of a flicker going on. Now, what if I want the strength of this noise to change over the length of my timeline? Well, thankfully, there's this thing called strength over time that acts just like our base and has a time scale. So let's go ahead and create a curve that looks almost exactly like this one and set our end frame to 48. So now the noise starts off not being strong at all, reaches 100% strength, and then goes back down again. It'll be more obvious when we add this to our other lights. So let's control and drag and copy these tags onto our two other lights and take a look at what happens. Ooh, look at that. So now we've got our animation of the three of these lights turning on and turning off again. Now the important part in these product shots is making sure that our lights sweep across the object. So what we're going to do is take this light group and control its Z position using Signal. Let's go into the coordinates, drag and drop this to the drop zone. Very cool. And let's change the min and max values from -10 to 5.1. And we're going to set it to linear. The reason we're setting it to linear is because Signal comes with a lot of these very cool presets for easing functions. So you've got things like quad, quart, expo, bounce, etc. We just want it to start out fast and slow down again. So we're going to change it from the regular linear to quart out. And just to make sure, let's set this to 48 frames. And when we click play, make sure we highlight this viewport. You can see the light starts out fast and slows down again. Ooh, and we get that nice animation as the light moves across. Okay, now lastly, we've got our camera here. And we're going to go into camera animation in the next example a little bit more. But for this one, we just want the camera, which is parented under this null, to rotate a little bit like this as our light sweep is happening. So I'm going to take the H value, drag and drop that onto the drop zone, and change our min and max from -9 to 9, set it to linear. And because the animation is not going to be visible from the beginning and the end, we're just going to leave this at the linear value. Let's make sure that we set it to 48 and click play. Whoa, would you look at that? That's looking fancy. So we've gone ahead and controlled our lights and the position of our lights all with Signal, and we've started to dip our toes into controlling cameras with Signal as well. Let's take a look at the final render of this guy. Okay, so our render is done. Let's take a look at it here. And as you can see, it loops nicely because it goes in and out in terms of brightness. So in this example, we've learned how to take our lights and our lighting setups and control them with Signal. I don't even know what this product is, but I know I really like it, and I know I want to buy it. So for the next example, let's move into controlling more of our camera animation with Signal. Let's hop in. All right, welcome to example number 3. So for this example, I put together a still life made out of a bunch of different doodads and primitives, and I used some of the modern material collection to add a variety of texture and color. I also used one of those gobos that's included with Greyscalegorilla Plus to add this light texture that gets cast across the objects, implying that there's sort of a light source off of camera. So far with Signal, we've moved objects with it, we've controlled lights with it, but in this instance, we're going to be adding some camera animation to bring this still life to life. Sorry, I had to make that joke. So let's go in and get started. To make the scene a little bit more manageable to look at, I'm going to hide these gobos right here real quick. And we're going to look at our camera setup. So the camera right here is pretty straightforward, and it's very similar to what we had in our previous scene where we've got our camera parented under a null so that we can rotate around a pivot. And the camera itself is targeted at this object. And the reason I've decoupled the targeting and the rotation is because when we add some noise to both of these objects, it's going to make it look a little bit more organic than if it was just parented to this and moving around on its own. So let's add that camera rotation to start out with. To make things run a little bit faster while I'm recording this video, I'm going to turn off materials and I'm going to change the level of detail to low. Now let's go to our camera rotate H parameter right here under rotation and add a signal tag for it. Now we're going to make this animate between -25 and 11. Oops, I put 1. I meant 11. Let's change this to linear. let's set our timeline to match and change it to something like quad in out. And you'll see as I scrub through the timeline that we have a nice animation that goes between these two settings. Now let's add a little bit of up and down animation as well. We're going to go to the P value, add another signal tag. We're going to change this to -4 and 1, set it to linear, set it to match our timeline, and change this to quad in out as well. Now let's scrub across our timeline and see. Okay, we've got a nice animation that goes from A to B. But what if we want it to loop? Well, one of the things we can do is we can take both of these tags, change their ending to half the timeline. So let's say 72 frames. And we can change the playback to ping pong. So what it's going to do is it's going to run through the animation all the way to frame 72, and then it's going to reverse and go back to the original position by frame 144. So let's try it out. Whoa. Okay, and we come on back. There we go, and we have a nice camera animation loop. Now, this is really cool on its own, and it could look interesting as a render, but I want to add some noise to both the camera and the camera target to give us a little bit of that organic movement. So let's bring these into Signal. For the camera itself, I'm going to take its P on transform, and I'm going to add some noise to it. Now, one of the interesting things about Signal is you can actually stack multiple noises. So I'm going to do that here and add some low frequency noise and add some high frequency noise. So let's start out with low frequency noise. Let's change its strength to 54%. Change its variation to something like 100, 100, 100. Actually, you know what? That last one I'm going to do 250 so we get a little bit more movement in Z. I'm going to change the loop point to 145. I'm going to change the speed to 0.08. And the seed, I just ended up with good results with 9,500. I think I clicked that random button. And then I clicked on the bias in the final scene and I changed it to 9%. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, so we've got some random camera movement. And as you can see, there's just a smidge of movement in Z. And I think that adds a little bit more of an organic feel. Let's add some high frequency noise to this camera as well. We're going to go back into base. We're going to add a second noise instead. So let's go to noise and change this to high frequency noise. Let's change that strength to something like 19%. Change the variation to 10, 10, 10. Change the loop point to what we had before, 145. Change the speed to something like, well, let's see. I don't think I changed the speed. I left everything else at the default. So now when I click play, we've got some of this low frequency movement. And it's very subtle, but you might be able to see it in the render on your own machine. We've got a little bit of movement on the camera. Let's do the same for our target. Let's take this, drag it into the drop zone, and we're going to add one more noise. We're going to change that variation in this noise to something like 15, 15, 15. We'll change the strength to 27%. We'll change the offset to 24. Make sure our loop point is the length of our timeline. The speed will be something like 0.1. And the seed value that I ended up randomly with was 1369, and the bias I left at 0. So now let's click play. Look at that. So we've got some animation going across as our camera sweeps back and forth, and we've got a little bit of noise on our camera and on our camera target. And what this will do is it will give us a little bit of that organic movement. Last but not least, I want to add some variation to our gobo. So let's click on our gobo, and let's change the exposure value using Signal. So let's drag and drop that in here, and go to noise and add a noise. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did for the camera. I'm going to use two noises stacked on top of each other to give just a little bit more organic variation. The first noise is going to be sort of the softer one, so I'm just going to call it soft noise. We'll make a variation of 0.5. We're going to change the speed to, let's see, I think I left everything else at default. Okay. And the strength should be at 100%. Okay. Then we're going to add a second noise. Here we go. And we're going to call this strong noise. Very cool. And under strong noise, we're actually going to set this to 50%, but we're going to make the variation higher. Let's go to 2. Let's set the loop point to 145. Make sure that we did the same for this noise. Go down here. I don't think I changed the speed, but I set the seed to something like 8,000. There we go. And now we can't see it while we're looking in our viewport, but if I click on this gobo, you can see that the exposure values are moving a little bit around 1. So that's very nice because it means that we're going to have looping variation in the brightness of our scene, and we're going to have our camera animation at the same time. All right, so here's our final render. And if you look at that, our ping pong animation on the camera loops back and forth, and the subtle noise that we added to the camera as well also loops. And we've got some interesting animation going on with the gobo. So this is just a great example to show you that not only can you use signal on objects, position, scale, rotation, you can use it on lights, you can also use it for camera animation. Next up, in the next example, we're going to check out how to use fields with signal. All right, welcome to example number 4, which is controlling these neon signs using signal and fields. Now, first and foremost, I'm going to say we are controlling the brightness of these neon signs using each of these objects' display colors. And to control display colors, it's pretty much exactly the same as using any other attribute in Signal and Cinema 4D. So if I drag and drop this color into here, and I just move that over next to this tag, we can do things like add some noise to it. If I go into noise, I can make sure that its variation is 50% in terms of value, set it to uniform, set it to 145, and maybe make the speed something like 2.8 and a strength of 15. So now when I go and zoom in very close on this neon sign, you'll see that we've got some subtle variation in terms of color. And what that's doing in the material is it's being driven for the emission amount. So if I show you the materials, we've got 2 of these amazing neon materials for Cinema 4D from Greyscalegorilla, and we've edited them so that this display color is basically acting like a multiplier. But I do want to stress that this isn't a Redshift specific technique. This can be render agnostic and can be used pretty much anywhere. So we're just going to focus on editing the display color. But when you pull open these scenes, I do encourage you to check out the materials and see how those function as well. So how do we control these animations with fields? Well, it's as simple as selecting the objects that we want to be affected. So we're going to do all of these objects that are the letters and the logo. The rest of these tubes we're not going to adjust. We're going to go to the Fields tab, and we're going to drag and drop this box field in there. And you can automatically see that it's at a strength of 0 because it's sitting outside of this box. And if I select the field and move it side to side in X, we can turn them on and off. And once it's activated, that noise will also be animating in the background. So how are we going to animate this box field? Well, we're going to use signal. So let's click on the box field, go to coordinates, drag and drop this X in there. And we're going to set this to 0 and 105 for the min and the max. Let's set it to linear and make sure that it matches our timeline. And we don't want it to be across the entirety of the timeline. We want it to go a little bit faster. So let's set it to 0 and 0.4 right here on this curve. And you can see that our box is now turning these on one at a time. Now, what about our logo? Well, the logo is a little too high to be inside this box field right here. So we're going to adjust our Y as well. Let's go to min and max 0 to 20. Let's set it to linear. And let's set this animation to like 0.2 to 0.4 of our entire timeline. Make sure that it matches the length. So now if I go back here and make sure that this viewport is activated, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of these sign parts turn on. And while they're activated, that noise is going on as well. Okay, so as a final cherry on top, I'd like to have this box field turn all of these parts of the sign, these letters and this logo, off and then on and then off again before it loops back at the beginning. So how do we do that? We'll add another signal tag to the strength parameter on this field. We're going to swap the minimum and maximum values. So on is this low point on the curve, and off is this high point on the curve. And we're going to set it to linear, and we're going to make sure that it matches our timeline length. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a few points here, like here and 2 here. So what we're going to do is create this kind of stair step effect that makes it turn on and then off again. There we go. And this guy. Let me just adjust this here so that those are basically rectangles. And now when I click play, we should see it turn the entire neon sign on, and then it's going to go off, on, off, and loop again. All right, so let's check out the render here. Ooh, look at that. We see the field controlling our neon sign, and we've got this wonderful animation where the sign lights up and then turns on and off. I don't know about you, but I would definitely pay the cover to check out Club Signal. Actually, you know what? Club Signal would definitely be cover free. So let's move on to our last example, where we're going to extend this even further and use the display color with Signal to blend two materials together. All right, welcome to example number 5, where we're going to be blending materials using display color and Signal. So in our materials, we've got one of the neon light materials, and we've got this modern plastic material. And inside Redshift, we've got a blend material node that's using this display color as a mix value. So very similar to adjusting the brightness of our emission using display color, we're going to be blending between these two materials. And we're also going to be adding a little bit of rotation and movement in Y. So let's get started by dragging and dropping our color into our drop zone, changing the min and max to black and white. And then we're going to go into our curve, and we're going to set this so that instead of going from the minimum value to the maximum value, we're going to add a little bit of animation right here, and we're going to have the animation end around here. Let me just adjust this curve real quick. Something roughly like that will do just fine. And I'm going to set it to match the length of our timeline, and we're going to set it to loop. What that means is if I go to our display color right here, we'll see it go on, off, and then have a long period of tails where it's doing nothing. And the reason we're doing that is when we offset all of our cubes, we'll get some nice still areas of animation while some of these cubes are activating and others are sitting still and then looping. And you'll see what I mean once I copy and paste this to all the other cubes. In the meantime, let's add our animation, and then let's add a rotation. So to add the rotation, we're going to go to our H value like so, and we're going to set it to 180 degrees. So let's go to maximum 180, and let's copy and paste this curve right here. Let me just drag this up a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm just going to go paste, and I'm going to make sure that it's set to match timeline and loop. And then for the Y position, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make sure that it goes from a minimum value of -7 to maximum value of 31. Let's paste that curve in, set it to match timeline, and loop. There we go. So now let me click play and see what happens. Cool. Look at that. So we've got the cube moving up and then down again, and then waiting until the end of the timeline to start over. Let's copy and paste this series of tags to all the other cubes in the scene. So give me just 1 second. Doodle-doo. Okay, so now let's take a look at what happens after we've copied all this and we click play. Very cool. They're all animated at the same time. But what if we want to add some offset? That's where this select all tag script comes in. And this one right here, that is random offset by object. And what that will do is it will adjust this offset value for each of these objects. So each of these tags on each of these objects will get the same offset value. Let's click that. And now they've all got separate offsets. And you can see some are set to 280, some are set to larger values like 484. The only problem with that is that it means that some of these cubes are not going to animate yet. In fact, almost all of them are not going to animate yet. So how do we remedy that? Well, if we take the offset and we invert it, then all of these animations will have started before the beginning of our timeline, and we'll get nicely offset animation. So to do that, we'll just use a quick formula in Cinema 4D, which is X, which indicates the current value that it's at. And we're going to go times -1. There we go. And now all of our offsets are inverted so that they start before the timeline. And when I click play, look at that. We've got some nice offset animation, and some of these cubes, like for example, this one right here is moving at the same time as this one. I'm just going to go in, select it, give it another random offset, and then click play. Oh, and I forgot, I need to invert that offset value. So let's go back one more time and just change it to X times -1. There we go. And you could do the same thing with your version of this scene. Adjust the offsets to your liking so that some of these cubes are not moving at the same time. And what's interesting is because the display color is also getting adjusted, if I click play and we look at the render, we'll see that some of these cubes are animating on and off. Now, it's a really low resolution render when I click play, but when I let it converge for a little bit, you can see that when they've rotated, it coincides with changing the material. So let's take a look at what this final render looks like. Hey, would you look at that? We got all our cubes animating. They're blending between the different materials. They're moving up and down, and they're rotating, and all of it is linked together and looping because of Signal. So I definitely hope this highlights the fact that Signal can work with pretty much any kind of keyframeable data. We use Signal to adjust, let's see, the position, scale, and rotation. We control the intensity of our lights. We animated our camera. We masked the emission values with fields. And in this example, we blended between materials. The possibilities are literally quite endless with this plugin, and so I hope this inspires you to add Signal to your daily workflow as well. I definitely look forward to seeing what people will create after watching this, and I very much appreciate you joining me for this video. Once again, this is Jake Allen for Greyscalegorilla, and thanks so much.
Thanks again for watching, everybody, and a huge thanks to Jake Allen for helping us make this video. We hope that you're more comfortable using Signal in your everyday animations. And in fact, let us know your favorite tip down below in the comments. We love to hear from you and love to see your work using Signal as well. Thanks again for being a Greyscalegorilla Plus member. And if you're not a member, now's a great time to go check it out, especially if you just watched all this training. Go check it out. It includes Signal and everything else we have here at Greyscalegorilla to help you make better renders in less time. And with that, thank you once again, and we'll see you in another video really soon. Bye, everybody.